Did a $2.4 trillion deterrent hinge on metadata? The $2.4 trillion number, what's actually at risk? Start with the price tag. The Government Accountability Office pegs the full life cycle of America's nuclear triad, development, acquisition, and sustainment, at roughly $2.4 trillion. That number isn't just hardware. It's crews rotating through launch control centers. It's concrete that doesn't crack in winter. It's diesel tanks that don't run dry at 3 a.m. It's HVAC filters catching dust in a sealed corridor so electronics don't fry. The deterrent lives in receipts as much as it lives in warheads. Here's the quiet truth. Deterrence is accounting. Every line item is a promise that when a phone rings, everything works. Procurement codes, national stock numbers, tell you which blower assembly fits which plenum. Depot cycles schedule when a guidance unit gets pulled and checked. Silo hardening budgets reveal which doors get a new gasket and which tunnels need drainage line. Stare long enough at line items and you start seeing the shape of forces. That's the trap and the opportunity. In the late 1970s and 1980s, both superpowers were obsessed with counterforce, hitting the other side's launchers before they could fire. Multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles made each missile a bundle of warheads. Math got brutal fast. If you could find silos with confidence, you could plan to take them out. If you could hide them, you forced the other side to waste shots. The MX peacekeeper debate lived here. Fixed silos, rail mobile. The shell game of multiple protective shelters. The United States explored spreading missiles across decoy sites so Soviet planners couldn't be sure which holes mattered. And inside that debate sat the quiet weapon, doubt that forces over-allocation. Ghost silos fit that lineage. If you could see doubt, make an adversary allocate warheads to empty places, you stretched their arsenal and stiffened your deterrent. But ghosts don't just live on maps. They live in the mundane. A spare part order that points to a grid square nobody admits exists. A maintenance rhythm that hums under the prairie. A winter power draw that only makes sense if climate control is working hard underground. The human stakes run through every one of those details. People serve at those coordinates. Towns border those fields. On the other side, Soviet targeters race deadlines, knowing a misread could mean their own failure. Now lay the $2.4 trillion number over that mental map. You aren't looking at a single silver bullet. You're looking at a machine with 3 legs. The bombers, the submarines, the land-based missiles, each leg held up by 1 million small parts. A rivet schedule on a bomber wing, a valve inspection on a ballistic missile sub, a blower motor in a hardened facility out in the plains. If a single field in a logistics database pulls those parts into a pattern, you can tip the balance of what the other side thinks you have, and where. That's why the trap narrative resonates. A leak like that doesn't expose a schematic. It exposes a rhythm. It tells an adversary when your hidden places breathe. Think in simple terms. HVAC filters clog on a predictable timeline. Compressors tend to fail on a curve. In winter, environmental control draws more power to hold a steady temperature. If a requisition system starts auto-matching those needs to decommissioned coordinates because a legacy map layer got mirrored into the live routing tables, you've just drawn a faint, repeating outline. You didn't intend to. You didn't even see it, but someone else might. Meanwhile, inside Washington, the standardization push was relentless. The Department of Defense kept tightening how services ordered and tracked everything. MILSDIP formats, unified stock numbers, common logistics catalogs. It made sense. Shared data cut waste. But it also meant that one field, one 2-letter site designator appended to a unit identification code or a DO DAAC, could propagate everywhere at once. A clerk didn't need to know what sat at the end of that code. The system did the matching. The system didn't ask questions. Stack the stakes. If Soviet analysts could pull open-source shipping metadata, scan commercial bills of lading, and chart repeat orders on those HVAC parts, quarterly filters, biennial compressor swaps, they'd see a tempo that matched life underground. Tie that to subtle dips in regional power draw when maintenance windows shut systems down, or small diesel generator tests that heat up a patch of dirt for just a moment, and the picture sharpens. You don't need a confession when the calendar and the kilowatts agree. For crews, none of this is abstract. A launch officer hears that some non-existent sites now sit in an adversary's target basket. A maintenance chief realizes the same spare parts that keep a corridor dry might also be drawing a dotted line for someone's satellite. On the Soviet side, an analyst betting their credibility on pattern recognition has to decide. Noise, decay, or the thing they were told to ignore because it looked too neat. If they call it wrong, their first strike math breaks. If they call it right, the risk of misreading our read of their read jumps. And remember that $2.4 trillion. It buys options. It also buys complexity, the kind that can fail in small places. A deterrent that vast is only as clean as its metadata. That's the edge of the cliff. The smallest field in a form can nudge the largest arsenal because the arsenal runs on forms. See how a two-letter code could push the line. We go to the moment a routine software patch met a forgotten map, and a normal requisition turned into a beacon. The patch, a routine logistics update that wasn't. To understand how a two-letter ghost slipped into the open, step into a windowless office where standardization was the mission and boredom was the camouflage. Exactly the kind of room where history hides. Late Cold War logistics lived inside forms. MILSDIP requests, do DAAC lookups, NSN catalogs that treated a nuclear site's blower motor like any other part on any other shelf. The push was simple on paper. Make every service speak the same supply language. Do D 400.25 tightened formats. FEDLOG pulled national stock numbers into a single searchable brain. The Joint Logistics Command and the Defense Logistics Agency chased duplication with a mop and a database schema. It wasn't glamorous, it saved money, and with every cleanup pass, more tables got stitched together. Vendor working off a Pentagon tasker proposed one more alignment, add a compact site category and security tier field so routing engines could prioritize shipments without a human poking every order. The idea made sense. Sensitive sites needed parts fast. A two-letter designator appended alongside the unit identification code and the do DAAC would let the system spot special handling and route accordingly. Less typing, fewer delays, more control. Here, where the seam opened. The contractor's team needed a source of truth for site geography and category. The clean table wasn't ready. So the developers pointed the auto-populate to a legacy location layer that still sat inside an old finance backbone. SDA and FINS installation tables, kept alive for reconciliation and audits. The layer carried ghosts, decommissioned grids, masked coordinates, residual entries with euphemisms that only made sense to the people who built them. On a whiteboard, someone wrote temporary mirror. In an internal memo, that same phrase landed between bullet points and deadlines. Nobody meant harm. They meant to meet a date. The schema looked tidy. New fields, new validations, more consistent records. The integration doc matched the Defense Integrated Data System line item formats. The test data, sanitized, predictable, passed. The red flag was a footnote, not a fire alarm. Mirror to legacy installation table pending scrub completion. A week later, the patch deployed on a Friday afternoon while phones buzzed about weekend duty rosters and a procurement freeze window. The two-letter field did exactly what it was built to do. When a clerk entered an NSN for an environmental control assembly, HVAC blower, filter rack, fasteners, the engine grabbed the unit's do DAAC, crosswalked its UIC, checked the new site category, and matched a delivery point with special handling. Except the match came from the legacy map's shadow, one of those temporarily mirrored entries that existed for accounting ghosts and reconciliation lines, not for live routing. In a healthy world, the field would have been blank or would have resolved to the declared base. In this one, it auto-completed to a code that lived in the margins. The contractor's lead flagged it in a change review, but framed it as a known dependency. Mirror until scrub, scrub during the next sprint. Program management nodded. Operations needed the prioritization features yesterday, and the test environment didn't include anything labeled decommissioned, because nobody thought a retired coordinate would ever be selectable for delivery. Why would it? The logic assumed the world was clean. Meanwhile, the patch rippled. FEDLOG updates pushed the field into more screens than anyone expected. Warehouse software saw it, even if it ignored it. Transportation modules ingested it, even if they didn't display it. Interfaces that handled MILSDRIP transactions passed it along as metadata, harmless in theory. And an export job that assembled sanitized records for partner systems, utilities planning for surge draws, carriers planning capacity, didn't know this new field needed to be stripped. The sanitization script lived one version behind the schema. Nobody updated the mask list. Inside a fluorescent-lit conference room, a junior tester mentioned the mismatch during a stand-up. The mask job throws a warning. The Scrum Master logged a ticket. Priority, medium. The systems ran fine. Orders moved. Turn times improved. Program success slides wrote themselves. Nobody saw was how the new field braided old and new worlds. The two-letter site designator extended the identity chain. UIC to DODAC to site category to a coordinate that had never fully died in the books. The legacy SDNFINS tables had kept those entries for audits, so a controller could prove that money blessed to hard facilities years ago had either been spent or moved. In that domain, temporary mirroring was defensible. In live routing, it was a live wire. There's a culture piece here too. In logistics, you don't ask why a site carries a certain tier. You ask if the part will arrive before the system fails. A clerk doesn't question the code that appears in the delivery match. The system is built to reduce judgment calls. The code appeared, the order flowed, the milestones cleared. The patch did its job. Up the chain, a separate team managed data sharing agreements with civilian utilities tasked to keep bases powered through spikes and storms. They needed heads-up notice for planned maintenance that would sag feeder lines or spin up standby generators. The export was supposed to abstract the where and keep only the when and the load. But because the new site field rode the same message as the maintenance window flag, and because the mask script lagged, those two bits of truth traveled together in a file nobody, outside, the sealed rooms were supposed to find interesting. On the contractor side, the post-deploy review listed action items, finish the scrub, replace legacy references, update sanitization masks, backfill docs. On paper, the risk looked contained, almost dull. In practice, the two-letter designator had just stepped out of an architecture diagram and into the world where patterns get harvested. All it needed was one ordinary requisition, one batch export, and one analyst on the other side who liked to chase anomalies. And that analyst was already awake. The micro-event, one clerk, one requisition, one impossible code. End of quarter always feels the same. Phones stacked with voicemails, screens full of back orders, and a clock that refuses to slow down. She's a junior logistics NCO, 2 years into the job, steady hands on paperwork that keeps air moving where air can't fail. The ticket lands in her queue. Environmental control, priority maintenance, NSNs already listed by the shop, blower assemblies, filter racks, fastening kits. Nothing fancy. She sips cold coffee, checks stock levels, and opens the requisition form. The new field is there, tucked beside the DODAC like it's always been. 2 letters, site category. She doesn't think about it because nobody does. The system auto-completes based on unit and priority. She enters the first NSN for the blower assembly. The screen flickers, matches a delivery point, and prints a route code she's never seen. It doesn't flag red. It doesn't throw a warning. It just sits there as delivery match. She frowns and scrolls the line. The part fits a standard plenum used across hardened facilities. The ship-to-code isn't the base. It isn't depot, it's somewhere else. She cancels the line and re-enters it. Same match. She tries the filter rack NSN to see if it forces a different route. Same match again. Her coffee goes untouched. There's a rhythm to this work. The motor bearings don't care about office politics. Filters clog on schedule. If the HVAC goes soft, electronics drift. She checks the clock. The cutoff for batch processing looms. She knows the rule. If the system picks a route and doesn't puke, you don't override it unless you're told. She calls the maintenance shop and asks if something changed. But that burns minutes and invites a debate she can't resolve. The patch launched last week. Program email said routing would get smarter. Maybe this is the smarter. She tags the request with the right urgency code, verifies the quantities, and hits submit. The requisition number populates. Status, open, root, special handling. She files it with 2 more line items and moves to the next ticket because there's always a next ticket. What she doesn't see is the current her keystrokes just joined. The order translates into a MILSTRIP document that carries all its fingerprints, NSNs, quantities, priority, unit codes, and that quiet 2-letter site designator riding shotgun. The base's warehouse control system ingests it. FEDLOG's updated schema recognizes it. The transportation scheduling module reads it as metadata, even if no local screen shows it. The Defense Transportation System assigns a carrier lane. A commercial bill of lading spins out with a consignee that's abstracted, but not invisible. That's one rail. Another runs through the maintenance calendar. The HVAC shop scheduled a short shutdown 2 Fridays from now to swap filter racks and balance airflow. That window flagged a feeder load advisory to the partner utility. Because the sanitization script lags the schema, the advisory carries the maintenance window and the new site field in the same payload. It's supposed to be harmless. It is. Her part is over by lunch. She jokes with a coworker about the vending machine swallowing quarters. She clears 2 stuck orders for a different squadron. She doesn't know that the combined hum of her requisition and the maintenance advisory just traced a faint line in a place that, officially, doesn't exist. Meanwhile, miles away and a world apart, a Soviet signals analyst sorts anomalies from a month of US shipping metadata. He's not reading secrets. He's reading patterns, consignee codes that repeat near empty counties, bills of lading pegged to standard HVAC assemblies, and utility load advisories that hint at brief sags on feeder lines. He clusters events on a plain-looking map and waits to see if the dots breathe like controlled air. The requisition from her desk drops into his queue as one line among hundreds. What makes it pop isn't the part, it's the interval. Filter racks drift toward quarterly swaps. Blowers last longer, but when they're paired, the calendar tightens. He overlays winter temperature bands because climate control works harder in the cold. He marks tentative circle around a grid square with no declared facility. He doesn't know about the legacy map layer. He only knows that when the 2-letter site field exists, shipments take a different lane. Back at the base, the first acknowledgement pings her inbox. Estimated ship date, standard. She closes the email. An hour later, transport updates the status to in movement. The maintenance chief gets his confirmation. The shop queues its work package. Her day stays ordinary. She will never hear that phones in Moscow lit up before dawn. She will never know that an impossible code whispered louder than a briefing. Her signature sits on a form that did exactly what it was built to do. The thing that shouldn't have happened had already happened. All it needed was a clerk who followed procedure and a system that didn't ask questions. The Soviet eyes, how adversaries read our boring data. He starts with the dull things because the dull things don't lie. Bills of lading, consignee codes, repeat national stock number orders that come like the tide. In a small room with low ceilings, a Soviet analyst pins printouts to corkboard and ignores the drama of speeches. He cares about lanes and intervals. If the same HVAC assemblies keep showing up near counties that on paper have nothing in them, he wants to know why. Here's his baseline. Grain taught them this. In the 1970s, Moscow watched freighters at US ports, counted tonnage, and learned more about American demand than they could from any press release. Tankers told them fleet tempos. Port berths whispered carrier cycles. KGB residentiaries in commercial hubs mailed back manifests and harbor gossip, and radio-electronic teams filled in the air gaps. Put enough boring pieces together and a shape emerges. That's the tradecraft. Now he layers in what the Americans unknowingly provided. The new 2-letter site field doesn't announce itself. It rides along as metadata. But when it appears, shipments route differently. He flags lanes where that field correlates with environmental control parts, filter racks that tend to come quarterly, compressors that skew toward 2-year swaps. He asks a simple question. Do these intervals breathe like a buried facility? He pulls utility data that isn't secret, just inconvenient. Regional load advisories hint at feeder sags. 10 minutes here, 20 there, linked to planned maintenance windows. Winter deepens the draw as climate control works harder. If those sags align with the logistics pulses, he's got a heartbeat. He overlays weather bands so he doesn't mistake a cold snap for a mission. He waits for a second pulse. 3 dots turn into 5. 5 trace a curve. The codes cluster near square-mile grids in the plains where census tables talk about wheat and nothing else. He isn't fooled by one-off spikes. He hunts for the rhythm. In January, filters. In March, nothing. In April, a compressor. Summer is quiet unless a bearing seizes. Then a short window for a shutdown appears in a utility partner's planning note, and the feeder line dips exactly when a shipment marked for special handling leaves a depot 2 states away. He circles the date and smiles without showing it. There's pushback in Moscow because there always is. Some analysts argue decoys. They point to American flirtations with shell games, MX peacekeeper shelters, and the whole mythology of empty holes forcing extra aim points. Another camp says noise. Civilian facilities buy the same HVAC parts. The room divides along habit lines, those who trust maps and those who trust calendars. He doesn't argue maps, he argues calendars. A single farm doesn't run environmental control like a hardened site. And the 2-letter field, it never shows up on farms. He tests the theory with side channels. Radio-electronic collectors task a pass on rural feeders. The equipment isn't magic. It watches current signatures for planned SAGs and generator tests. A week later, reports trickle in. A dip on feeder 11B, followed by a brief spike consistent with a diesel genset spin-up. Minutes after the spike, a tiny infrared heat bloom registers on a satellite pass. Brief, local, and gone. Not conclusive, but annoying to anyone arguing coincidence. Meanwhile, he builds a ledger. Each grid square gets a score. Logistics rhythm, power anomalies, IR whispers, winter amplification. He's not mapping warheads, he's mapping probabilities. The question inside his head is brutal and simple. If these are ghosts, why do they breathe like people who can't afford to let the air go stale? There's a detail he keeps to himself because it feels like a tell. The bills tied to the 2-letter field take carrier lanes that avoid known bases. They rarely hold for long at intermediate hubs, as if someone is smoothing the path. That smoothing can be policy, not secrecy, but in his world, policy is a pattern too. If the Americans care enough to shave hours, the end point isn't a warehouse that can tolerate drift. It's a place where drift becomes risk. He proposes a tasking package. No grand gestures, just better eyes. Synthetic aperture radar to catch ground disturbances too regular for agriculture. Infrared sweeps during pre-announced maintenance windows. Errant watch feeder lines during those windows. He adds a caution that sounds like humility, but is actually a dare. Assume decoys, score for rhythm. His chief signs it grudgingly because budgets are tight and egos are tighter. But the work is cheap compared to a wrong call in a war plan. While that spins, he runs a control. He samples declared missile fields and tracks their HVAC rhythms just to see if the curve matches. It does within margins. Declared sites have louder footprints, heavier maintenance, visible lanes, human noise. The ghost grids are quieter but not silent. Their curves look like cousins. In the bullpen, someone mutters that Americans love their paperwork, and the table chuckles because it's true. He doesn't laugh. He writes a note to self. Paperwork is how machines talk to each other. If your adversary standardizes the way their machines talk, you don't need to break the code. You need to listen long enough. The memo that climbs the ladder in Moscow is cautious on purpose. It avoids the word silo. It uses protected site candidates and recommends allocation review. That's how you move a mountain without telling it you're pushing. Upstairs, planners won't redraw anything tonight. They'll put a pin in it and ask for a second echo. The second echo is already inbound. A maintenance calendar export in the US failed a sanitization job, tied a window to a feeder, and kept the 2-letter field attached. The analyst won't know why it happened. He'll only know that the window he predicted landed where his map was blank, and for 10 minutes, the second exhaled on maintenance windows that shouldn't exist.